The use of force against Libya and international law. This short presentation looks at the use of force against Libya and whether or not it is in accordance with international law. Our Charter of the United Nations, which governs the use of force by states in the international community. The United Nations Charter is a treaty, a legally binding obligation for the 192 member states that have ratified it to create the United Nations. These states have put down as primary purposes and principles of the United Nations that states must settle their disputes peacefully and that states must not use force against each other. These principles and purposes were adopted after World War II in an attempt to prevent another world war from starting and to mitigate and prevent the use of force by states. The member state of the United Nations is entitled to the protections of the United Nations Charter and must also respect the provisions of the Charter. In this case, Libya has not used force against any other member state, but other member states are using force against Libya. This is prima facie a violation of the UN Charter. But there are exceptions. One relevant exception is that the Security Council may authorize the use of force. Exactly what the UN Security Council purported to do when it adopted Resolution 1973. According to this resolution, states may take all necessary measures to protect civilians and to enforce the no-fly zone over Libya. The key necessary measures, which in UN jargon connotate that the Security Council is authorizing the use of force by states. The Charter system requires that several criteria be met for a resolution to legitimately authorize the use of force by member states. If these criteria are not met, then the states act in violation of the Charter. First, the Security Council must have adopted the resolution in accordance with the Charter. The Security Council must be acting in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Any exception to these purposes and principles must be interpreted narrowly. Let's look at each one of these. First, the procedure. Article 27, paragraph 3 establishes the procedure for the adoption of Security Council resolutions on other than procedural matters. In this case, a resolution authorizing the use of force, as Resolution 1973 was, or even Resolution 1970, authorizing measures against Libya that do not constitute the use of force, both of these must be adopted under the rules provided for in paragraph 3 of Article 27 of the Charter. That means that at least a majority of 9 member states of the Security Council must cast an affirmative vote to adopt the resolution. In each of these cases, at least 9 members did cast an affirmative vote. In the resolution that authorizes the use of force, Resolution 1973, 10 member states cast a vote affirmatively for the resolution. 5 member states abstained from the resolution. Article 27, paragraph 3 goes on to say that the majority of 9 member states must include the concurring votes of the permanent members of the Security Council. Only 3 members of the Security Council that are permanent members concurred with Resolution 1973. 2 members, China and Russia, did not. They abstained from a vote on the measures taken in Resolution 1973. UN practice has shown that when a state abstains, a resolution may still be adopted, and that was the case in Resolution 1973 that authorized, allegedly, the use of force against Libya. But we still must ask of whether or not that resolution was in accordance with the primary purposes and principles of the Charter. As we've already seen, those principles include those in Article 2.3 and Article 2, Paragraph 4, which requires states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means and require states to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against another state. In this case, this resolution did not prevent or did not require states to resolve their disputes peacefully. In fact, Resolution 1970, which did include measures not involving the use of force, was adopted only a few days before Resolution 1973 was adopted, without even enough time for it to be implemented. But we'll come back to that. But if there is an exception to these basic purposes and principles, then that exception must be interpreted narrowly. What does it mean to interpret exceptions narrowly? First, it must mean at least that the rules for using force that are in the Charter are respected by the Security Council. It also must mean that any interpretation of these rules must be consistent with the purposes and principles of the Charter. In other words, any interpretation of an exception or the rules relating to the possibility of using force must be restrictive and in a manner that prohibits the use of force in as far as possible. In other words, as the founders and framers of the UN Charter and the creators of the United Nations intended, the use of force should be limited to only those cases in which it is absolutely necessary. To do that, they established a system in the UN. The system is set up in Chapter 7 of the Charter, particularly in Articles 41, 42, and 47. Before we come to these articles, we should note that Chapter 6 of the UN Charter requires states have recourse to peaceful means of settlement. States must do that of their own volition. In this case, Libya has reached out to other states to help it settle a dispute within its country. But did the Security Council reach out to Libya to try to resolve the dispute that it had and its member states had with Libya regarding the treatment, according to the Security Council, that Libya applied to its own citizens? In fact, the Security Council removed Libya's voice from the debate. They did not allow a representative of Libya to be present. They did not even send an envoy to speak with a representative of the government. Instead, they spoke only with people representing the armed opposition to the government of Libya. In any event, let us see whether Resolution 1973 is in accordance with at least these three provisions of Chapter 7 that are found in Articles 41, 42, and 47. One says that means not involving the use of force may be used. As we just mentioned, Chapter 6 elaborates some of these means. In this case, a resolution, Resolution 1970, was adopted just a few days before Resolution 1973. Resolution 1970 involved measures that were not constituting the use of force. It prevented individuals in Libya, named individuals, from traveling abroad, and it froze the assets of individuals and entities in Libya. But Resolution 1970 was not given adequate time to function. Article 42 requires that the Security Council make a finding that the means undertaken under Article 41 have not proven to be effective before they can move to authorizing the use of force under Article 42. No finding was ever made. In fact, it probably could not have been made because not enough time and not enough effort was put into trying to resolve the dispute peacefully, or even trying to use the means that were adopted in Resolution 1970 to try to resolve the dispute. Nevertheless, the Security Council acted under Article 42 to use force against Libya. Because it is an exception to one of the primary purposes and principles of the United Nations, it must do so with great care. That means especially that the control, the strategic direction concerning the use of force must be held by the Security Council. For that purpose, the Security Council has established the Military Staff Committee, which consists of representatives of each of the permanent members of the Security Council. The Military Staff Committee did not even meet after Resolution 1973 was adopted, and certainly has not been involved in the strategic direction of the use of force under Resolution 1973. Instead, the strategic direction of the use of force under Resolution 1973 has been left to countries who have previously illegally bombed Libya. For example, the United States, which bombed Libya in violation of international law in 1986. It would appear that none of the three articles that must be respected for the Security Council to legitimately and in accordance with international law authorize the use of force have been respected in this case. The Security Council did not abide by the basic rules of the Charter in deciding to use force against Libya. The use of force against Libya was illegal. What difference? Well, it is a violation of the UN Charter, but perhaps more importantly, it makes a difference to people on the ground. When international law is violated, people die. The Charter of the United Nations tries to stop this, but we need to respect it for it to work.